but it is very, very good to see you all. Julian, thank you for setting the scene. And what I'd really like to do now is just give everyone a minute to introduce themselves, and then I'm going to ask a few questions. But Julian, thank you so much. And I'm going to come back to some of the incredible work that you've done in this space. But Will, could you introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, hi everyone. I am Will Fletcher. I'm the interim chief executive of the Joe Cox Foundation, and I will talk a bit more about Jo and the important impact she's had on loneliness later. But continuing her work on loneliness is one of the legacies that we try to follow through at the foundation.
And it was that topic that actually first drew me into politics. And one of the first ever big meetings I attended was the commission report. So it means a lot to me to have you here tonight. Thank you very much. My dear friend Ifraax, if you could introduce yourself, please.
I'm so happy that you made it, Anya. Like, this is brilliant, brilliant conversation, and you were so important to finally get through. My name is Ifraax Samatar. I am a councillor in Hackney, and I work in the mental health sector. So this topic that we're discussing tonight is personal to me, professional to me, and community-wide to me. Is really important, and I'm really pleased that we're here to talk about it.
The irony was not lost on me. Hosting a webinar called "You Are Not Alone" and not being able to get in was the irony was really there. So this is a topic that's so important to me as well. It's really fundamental to so much of the work that we do here in Hackney and wider in politics. I know the Fabians are really passionate about this topic, and certainly compassion in politics. It's in the DNA of everything we do. And even today, it was really interesting. The government czar for counter extremism, Sarah Khan, has done a report today about looking at social cohesion. And there's a great quote I just wanted to share right at the start that she said, which is, "Weakening of social cohesion provides an environment for extremist narratives to take root. The increase in extremist activity contributes to a weakening of social cohesion, and in a vicious cycle, this continues. This can be eased by a building of cohesive communities and improving democratic engagement." So we can already see there that loneliness and social isolation is not just one person's experience, it has really wide social implications. And so what we'll do is we're going to talk a little bit about the work that everyone's done in this space and then open up to questions. So I just wanted to start with you, Julian. I've been reading up about the amazing work that you've been doing in this. I think it began in 2016, is that right?
Actually, it began before then, but in the town of Frome, it actually began in 2013, and the stuff that I've been doing actually probably goes back to about 2010.
Brilliant. So tell us a little bit about what got you into that space. How you didn't wake up one day and think, right, I'm going to be the loneliness guru. What happened? What was your light moment?
So it's really to do with palliative care, which is looking after people who are dying. And I was trained as a palliative care physician, and it was, I mean, I was doing everything I could to do the best job I could. It was literally one morning, like it was, just like, oh my, it's all about relationships. And so dying, so we think, dying is something that happens to an individual, but it doesn't just happen to the individual. It happens to everyone all the time, because everyone is involved in the experiences of death, dying, loss, and caregiving. And how that manifests in different part of the world depends in different cultures. It just is different for every single place. And it was like, okay, the humans have been looking after each other for as long as we've been on two legs, 2 million years. And we've been looking after each other as we've died. And we have rituals and cultural traditions and practices and caring traditions. And that context was like, it's all about community. And then what happens is, when you take that perspective, you kind of go, oh, right, well, maybe medicine's got something a role to play in here, but it's not the main issue. And then in 2016, when I was doing some work in Somerset around end of life, somebody said, a couple of people said, oh, you should go and talk to people in Frome. So I went to speak to the people in Frome, and it was clear we were just doing the same thing. They weren't just doing it in end of life, they were doing it in healthcare as a whole. And we knew, so we joined forces because we were, we had, things that would help each other. And we knew that we somehow had to protect our funding, and we got the data on the impact. We had no idea. We knew the stories from what people were telling us, that it transformed lives. When you stimulate community connections, you transform lives, and you hear the stories. And when you combine that with healthcare, the impact is transformative. We had no idea. And when we got the results, I got the spreadsheet with all the information. I put it in a pivot chart, and I saw these charts come up, and my jaw hit the floor. It's like, this is like, how come we didn't learn this when we learned medicine?
No.
It is more powerful than everything else. And so human connection, it's not just that loneliness is awful. It is that connection and belonging are really, really good for us. So that's the way that I got into it. Does that answer your question, Anya?
Yeah, it definitely does. Do you remember any of the statistics or the data at all? Have you got any couple of things that would highlight this huge shift from just medicine to
Yeah, so
solutions?
so there are no, I'll just kind of, it's quite hard to get your head around that, but there are no intervention up until that point. No one had been able to reduce whole population emergency admissions to hospital.
Mhm.
It's been an insolvable problem, and in fact, the Labour government of 2001 wrote a NHS plan 2004 saying we're going to shift care from hospitals into the community. And between 2004 and 2015 or something like that, emergency admissions went up by 42%. And because they never invested in community, they thought they just pour money into health professionals in community and you would solve the problem. But it doesn't, because the problem is not lack of medical care, it's lack of connection and belonging. It's a what's happening in our society. And I'd been familiar with this work, with the work I've been doing in hospital. So we saw that emergency admissions in Frome, a town of 28,000 people, went down by 15%. And in the rest of Somerset, they went up by 30%. And we knew that was 5% of the total health budget. And furthermore, because I worked in hospital, I knew the devastating impact of the influx of emergency admissions. It completely disrupts the functioning of hospitals. It's been a categorical disaster, particularly because of the theories around, oh yeah, we're going to reduce emergency admissions to hospital. They decided they were going to close wards before the actual emergency admissions dropped, and that created havoc.
Yeah.
So when you start to dig down into the figures, there are no that chart that I showed of that, the impact of good social relationships compared to other major risk factors for premature mortality, for risk of dying. When you put that into practice, it's the most powerful. If you wanted to say, what could we do to improve our society? Well, connection and belonging at community level, is absolutely critical. And by the way, you will totally transform healthcare. But it's not just healthcare, you transform everything. You
It's
transform,
incredible.
and the place to look for that transformation are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And it's moving away from this top-down approach to how we run our country to one that comes from the ground up, that
Yeah.
nourishes community and puts community first. And what can you do to help stimulate and encourage and create a sense of friendliness in community? And
Well, We're going to come back to that at the
Yeah.
end, because as you know, this webinar series is all about looking for some solutions and way forward for us all. But that's really powerful, Julian. Thank you, about, you know, the statistics and the financial benefit as well, if nothing else, of, you know, if we can get this right, get the holistic nature of looking after people right, actually it benefits across the board. So Will, I want to bring you in at this stage as well, because it sounds like actually the Commission was starting to do, well, certainly Joe Cox was starting to do work on this theme around the same time. So wonder if you can tell me a little bit about the loneliness report and all the work.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, Jo was very passionate about tackling loneliness. It partly came from her own lived experience of loneliness, especially when she went off to university. She felt very lonely and isolated. And she famously said, I will not live in a country where thousands of people are living lonely lives forgotten by the rest of us. So Jo, being the kind of person that she wasn't just going to sit around on her laurels and wait for someone else to do something about this. And she got together with Seaman Kennedy, who was a Conservative MP at the time, and they set up a commission on loneliness. That commission, after Jo's murder, became known as the Jo Cox Commission on Loneliness. So it had been founded in 2016, and it was effectively the first piece of work that the Jo Cox Foundation did was acting as the secretariat to finish that piece of work that Jo had started. Yeah, the report was published in 2017. It was astonishing as a commission because the government accepted all of the recommendations, which is unheard of.
Yes. How did that happen?
In commissions that report into government. And it led to, this was under Theresa May's government, it led to the UK becoming the first democracy in the world to have a named Minister for Loneliness. And we became the first country as well to have a loneliness strategy. So those were published, and a really amazing legacy of Jo, you know, having set up that initial idea. I think we would probably say at the foundation that things have stagnated since then. Sadly, loneliness is an issue that very much in the second half of the teens, especially at that time around the commission, you know, saw its star rising and really got the spotlight. But you know, as we all know, since 2020, the world has been a very complicated place, and there are many issues fighting for people's attention. We may be focused a bit on loneliness during the pandemic again, because of concerns that people would be lonely. I think actually during the pandemic, we also saw an amazing moment of community that mitigated that loneliness at that time. And we're in fact seeing more perhaps long-term impacts of loneliness coming out of the pandemic. So for us, you know, I think we're really focused at the moment on pushing our new government to think about what they can do to really get loneliness moving up the agenda again.
Well, if anyone can, it's the Jo Cox Foundation. I have every faith in you. And it's going to be really interesting. Maybe in a moment we can look at some of the recommendations. And then when you say it's stalled, what would be some of the ways forward? But I also now want to turn to Ifraax, because the role of local councils and local councillors in this area is so vital. What do you feel councillors can bring to this topic? What's their role in all of this?
I think we can bring a very important role in the sense that we are that bridge between where the decisions and the policies and things are made and the front lines of actually connecting with the community. And for me personally, I'm very privileged to be elected in an area where I grew up. And so it's almost like speaking and representing my neighbors, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about some of the issues that that's facing people, that's leading to the causes of loneliness, it's not just, sometimes a lot of people just assume loneliness is a sense of, oh, you're isolated from things and you know you're by yourself, and sometimes there's solitude. Some people want to have their own solitude and loneliness because of you're being forced to, because of what's going on around you. And so for us as councillors, we have that privilege to, when we knock on a door, to sometimes say, are you okay? But we're not just talking about, let's have a cup of tea and talk, but also let's look at some of the issues that you're going through that's resulting in this. So it could be somebody that's living in a condition in their house that's where they don't feel comfortable people coming in. So that's what's making them isolated. It could be somebody because of languages that they don't feel connected to the world around them because of the conflicts and all the dark energy of the world around us with media and everything. A lot of people just feel like they want to hide from all of that. So there's so many reasons that prevent people from connecting. That key word that Julian mentioned, the importance of connecting with others, etc. We councillors have that privilege of being that bridge between, like I said, where the decisions are made and the community, and just making sure we bring that connection as much as possible.
That's so brilliantly put. I love that concept of being a bridge. And I love doing any work with you in Hackney because the joy that you bring to so many people, and whenever you walk in a room and people are like, oh, it's Ifraax, it's wonderful. But I know for you, one of the real issues recently has been, you know, post-Gaza, post all the issues in the Middle East, and how that's played out and how that's increased social isolation. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the really positive work that you've done around interfaith connections, because that's a really key part of this discussion, isn't it?
Massively. I think it's really important that people realize sometimes visual representation of who we are doesn't necessarily mean when something happens in the world that we're supposed to put ourselves in boxes. Because if you do that, you're not trying to solve anything or even go towards any positive thing. You're actually dividing people even further. And so even when I was in school, I've always been that person that's curious and to learn about things and understand why things are the way they are. It's absolute horror what's happening in Gaza, and a lot of people are now celebrating what's happening in Syria, but at the same time, should we be celebrating? Is it okay? What's going on? Because a week ago or so ago, some of these people that are now liberating people were supposed to be bad people, and now they're good people. I don't understand what's going on. So it's so complicated what's going on out there. And so I can't control what's going on out there, but what I can control is what's going on around me here in my community. And so when a lot of people say, you're in a position of elected, you're supposed to be saying this, you're supposed to be saying that, I have to remind people when it comes to all the stuff that's reported and the things that people said, Jewish people will feel that sense of isolation just as Muslim people, just as any other people on a humanity scale will be impacted by this. And so my duty is not just to one box, etc., is to kind of figure out how do we bring our sense of community on a local level, and to figure out how we can work together to try and find peace within us. And then if we do that, then hopefully we can put pressure on the powers that be, if that makes sense, but not losing that sense of neighborly community in what we do. Because unfortunately, the compassion key word, when we look at what's going on in how media reports things, the compassion is the first thing that goes, and vilifying and anger is the first thing that comes. And that's the joy of what I do with my interfaith work, of looking beyond the labels of the religion and the identity and bringing the people to try and talk to each other.
That's perfect. And Will, that has to bring me on then to one of Joe's core messages about more in common. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and about how we build those bridges that Ifraax started to talk about.
Yeah, and I guess to give the full quote for anyone who's not heard it, Jo said very famously in her maiden speech, "The truth is that we have more in common than that which divides us." And actually, Anya, I was really interested to hear you talk about Sarah Khan, you know, because truthfully, you know, division and loneliness are two different expressions, you know, of the same problem. of the breakdown in the strength of community.
Yeah.
That we're seeing, you know, not just here, but in countries, you know, right across the world, as our society changes, that community's really being lost. And there is something really very, very valuable about spending time with people who are different from ourselves, you know, and that helps us both appreciate, you know, from a perspective of equity and diversity and inclusion. It helps us appreciate what we all bring to the table, and how those things differ. And it also helps us appreciate that core humanity, you know, and understand that at the end of the day, we are all people.
Yeah.
And I guess it comes, you know, it comes to Ifraa's point as well about it helps us build our empathy and treat each other with compassion, which is really key. You know, if we want to build community again, we need to move more into a space where people are building bridges and not tearing each other down anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Julian, that looked like a lot of the work that we were seeing from Frome around bridge building. And I was watching the fantastic video, I'd recommend everyone go and watch it, that talked about the project and talked about these community groups and making those connections with each other. That's got to be one of the core points then around social isolation is that reaching out and connectivity. Oh, you're on mute.
There's a few things to say about that, and I think that one of the first thing to say about it is that when we have this habit that when we think about a community, we think about what's wrong with the community, and we use labels like social isolation, deprivation, you know, a whole variety of different labels. But what we don't do is we don't treasure map. And if we all think about our own communities and we think, well, okay, look, if connection and belonging are key to human survival, where are the places that connection and belonging, where do they happen? And they happen in schools, workplaces, they happen outside post offices, they happen in parks, they happen in community groups, they happen in museums and galleries, they happen everywhere. And you know that every single human being carries gifts and treasures. And so what we tend to do is we tend to go, oh, we got to solve the problem of loneliness because we paint maps of misery. But that's the wrong starting place. We need to paint treasure maps.
I love that.
Build connection and belonging that is already there. You know, we have this impression that this stuff is not going on, and that's wrong. It is going on all the time, everywhere. And then how do we bring that to light, and how do we connect it together? So I think that there are particular ways in which we can do that, which we can talk about, you know, which are who are the connectors in the community, what are the role of the connectors, and you know, and there are lots of different ways of doing it which have a profound impact. I will say this to give you an idea. So for example, in Frome, we've trained over 1,000 people in how to become an activated connector in their community, which builds on the natural resources that people have. And so we know that connectors have 20 conversations a year. That's 20,000 conversations in a town of 28,000 people about how the community can support the community. If you walk into a cafe or a library or a restaurant or the GP surgery or wherever it is, there are people looking out for you. And that thing about somebody looking out for you in a nice way means that you walk into a friendly environment. It transforms the environment. It's this subtle body language that takes place where you go, I feel safe and belong here. This has happened so much in Frome that people have moved to Frome because it's now known as a friendly town, and it's created a housing problem. And so what I would say is that it's not about solving the problem of loneliness. It's about painting the treasures of community that are already there and building and enhancing. And those communities, when they're activated, will solve the problems of loneliness themselves. You know, and yeah,
That's wonderful. Will, you're nodding away. You're obviously finding a lot to agree with. What's your thought?
I really am, and I think, you know, Annie, you said we might come back to that question of, you know, what needs to be done, and I think from our perspective, at, you know, at Joe Cox, where we're existing now very much at a national policy level, you know, one of the real challenges is it's brilliant having a named Minister for Loneliness. It's very challenging that Julian rightly has used the word holistic a lot. You know, this is holistic solutions are needed to build our communities to address loneliness. So it's very challenging having a named Minister for Loneliness who sits in DCMS, doesn't massively have lots of levers to pull on. So you know, one of the things that I'm very mindful of is that in the UK, 16 to 29-year-olds are twice as likely to report that they're lonely as those who are over 70. So actually strengthening the communities that we already have in schools and universities, for instance, is going to be something that's going to be really key to tackling that rise of loneliness that we're seeing in young people. You know, and I think this is where I completely agree with Julian. What we have to do is not assume that we have to build things from scratch. We have to find what's already there, and support those who are already doing things and build them up so that they can do more and reach out to their communities.
Yeah, I love that inversing of it. It's really great and it's very empowering. Ifra, in terms of reaching out to young people and in terms of, you know, connecting with them, for me, when I'm listening to all of this, I think one of the things that comes across loud and clear is that we need to have these conversations. And the good news is I do want this to be part one of a two-part, at least, conversation, on top of all the work that all three of you are doing in this space. I think we have to start by acknowledging that so many people have these feelings, and that's okay, and let's start talking. But what have you seen in terms of young people, going back to what Will's saying? Are you seeing that on the doorstep, that more and more people are feeling isolated?
Before the world of politics, my hat was a youth worker and a teacher. So I was actively working. And that's one of the frustrating things that led me more into politics, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I got extremely frustrated with seeing so many from loneliness to bullying to so many issues that's affecting young people, and I just felt like I was just shouting at the world and nobody was listening, if that makes sense. So I thought to myself, if I actually sit on those tables where some of these decisions of how to help people are being made, I might do something. And then reality said, oh, so you really, it's more complicated now. But it's true, it's from not just the classroom, but when the children and the young people go home and they're in those communities, if there's not resources available for them to have that sense of connection, then all that's going to be available is the internet and the phones, and that does not always equal to a sense of belonging, because you're entering this wide world of so many things could come from there. And as cheesy as it sounds, growing up in Hackney myself, it wasn't the best time in the early 2000s, but at least we had from a Sure Start to a lot of youth clubs. There were so many things and places for us to go to have that sense of belongings. And yes, we have those spaces now, but it's not the same as it was before due to all the burden and the pressure that's on local organizations. And so we are seeing it at the more doors that we knock on, and even on the street as we walk in and we see young people and just stop by to see how are you today, and they talk to us about the issues that's going on, and you see it happening all around.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Hackney is wonderful for that. You can't walk down the road without meeting someone you know, and I think that's such a joy, and we're very lucky with that, aren't we? Julian, if people are watching today or watching on playback and thinking this does feel like quite a big topic, what's my role in it? Where should I start? What would you say? And then I'll come to you, Will, as well.
So we've started up something called TLC connectors, Talk, Listen, Connect. And that's really a way of, I think so the bit of information that I'd shared with you right at the very beginning. The first thing is to know that that connection and belonging, if you want to live a long, healthy, happy life, you know, it's about connection and belonging. And people don't know that. And it's more powerful than, you know, giving up smoking and having a good diet or exercising, whatever it is. So the first thing is to know that survival of the kindest is present in every single human being. That when you create conditions of belonging, this incredible flourishing happens. So the TLC connectors, they really say, look, this bit, everyone can be an activated citizen. So come and be a TLC connector and wear a badge that says I'm a TLC connector. Because if you sit in a cafe and you've got a badge that says I'm a TLC connector and you see somebody else has got a badge, that's a social movement. I'm older than you lot, but you would, you know, you might not remember Alice's restaurant, but you know, there's that whole thing about going into a cafe and anyway, so you know, whatever. So there's the point about this is that everyone is naturally a connector. Everyone has the potential to be kind. That this is the kind of core characteristic of human beings. And we need to get away from the stupidity of saying money, power, wealth is what route to happiness.
Yeah.
It's not. It's connection and belonging. And it's turning that into a social movement and letting people understand. It's like you can, one of the things that we found is we've been doing this, you know, running this stuff for a long time. And when we talk about it, anyone who hears it, they go, phew, I knew that was true.
Yeah.
I knew that relationships were more important than how much money I earn or how great I am or how beautiful I am, or, you know, I mean, I laugh at the idea of survival of the fittest because we evolved in groups of 25 to 100 people. If there was this one male, usually male, who was the biggest, the strongest, the most brutal, and murdered his rivals, that would have been the quickest route to extinction that human beings had. And it's like the key message is survival of the kindest, that everyone has it. And it is up to us to create it. And if we hear politicians talking about fear, we know that they are shutting down for their own purposes to have power. And actually, we need to stand up to that and resist it.
It sounds like there's a few politicians we could have a bit of a coffee chat with about these topics, Julian. So we'll try and do that. Will, you're nodding. What's your thoughts?
I mean, I think if you're sat here as an individual, thinking what I can do, I think, you know, I would say the most important thing is to get involved in community. You know, community isn't something that's done to you. It doesn't happen from the top down. It happens from the bottom up. And actually, you know, it's great both for tackling your own loneliness. I remember I live in Derbyshire. And when I moved to Derbyshire about 3 years ago as a childless adult, I felt very lonely and isolated, you know, and getting involved in community and connecting was what helped me. And now means that I know others and I'm connected to them and I'm reaching out and helping them as well. I think that's really powerful. And one of the ways, you know, that we encourage that through the foundation is through our Great Get Together initiative, which we should be running again next summer. You know, so follow us, find out about the Great Get Together, organize one, even if it's just inviting some neighbors around for a cup of tea. You know, it's a step to building community and reaching out.
So powerful. Julian and Will, if you could get typing and put those two links in the chat, that would be amazing. We've had a really good question come in, and I'm going to address it first to Ifraax while Julian and Will are typing. It's quite long, but the heart of it is there are conflicts in the world that are polarizing societies. I also sense that a lot of the activism today more often replicates the divisions instead of encouraging finding, as we were saying earlier, common ground. One feels pushed to pick a side, so to speak, and belong to one side. I find this paradoxical because it offers an opportunity to belong, but at the same time sabotages the possibility of actually connecting with others and other views. It then says, how can you cultivate discernment, especially among young people looking to belong to a community who may be vulnerable to extremist ideologies? Ifraax, I know that's something that you have put a lot of thought into, and you are someone that lives and breathes bringing communities together. So what would you say? A brilliant question, by the way, and I so agree with the heart of what you're saying. Thank you. It's Mara, thank you.
Thank you, Mara. That is an incredible question. And it's one of those questions that cannot be answered in a simple webinar kind of a thing. It's something that requires a deeper analysis and discussions, because unfortunately the key word is conflicts that's happening in the world. And then we're talking about the consequences and the impact that's having on young people as well as communities on a local level. And remember at the very beginning when I was talking about what can I control in my kind of in this, all the things that's happening around me. And the problem that we have is selective sympathy and selective outrage, if that makes sense, based on the algorithm of the social media pages we follow and the type of news we watch and the type of people we surround ourselves with. If that happens just same, like I said about boxes that we're in, then you will only receive information and things based on just the algorithm of what you're kind of following, if that makes sense. So that means your eye is turned from the rest of the world. If we were really open to all the horrors of the world around us, then we would look at it as a global issue, and we would have global connection and global humanity in how we look at conflicts and how we look at, you know, all these things happening around us. But unfortunately, that's not what's happening. And that's where the selective outrage and the selective something happens. And then that means smaller communities become more isolated, more marginalized, more villainized. And the role we have to play is to take the outside noise that's really loud and to try and bring more of an internal localized community to kind of just say. And for example, when I was first a child coming to Hackney, everybody around me was different to me. Like I came from a world where it was just me, my language, my culture, my everything back home in Somalia. But conflict made us run from our own. And I entered a world where all of these people looked different to me. And to me, that's an exciting feeling of exploring stories and experiences from different people's perspective. And that's what's missing, that compassion, that curiosity, that sense of what else is happening, rather than this is what's happening, we need to focus on this area only. If we just open our eyes and ears to the other and ask ourselves what we can control, that's local, that's community, and that's those your neighbors and the people around you. As Will said, start there, getting involved on a community level. That's how that connection starts to develop.
That's brilliant. And as you said that, it made me think of a wonderful book that I read many years ago called The Compassionate Mind, Paul Gilbert. And he talks about compassion as almost as an exercise, as a muscle that you can develop. And I think that curiosity that you were mentioning there is part of that, isn't it? It's very easy to passively stay in your own little bubble and therefore not look for those connections. But actually, if you start to exercise it, if you reach out to groups that Julian's mentioning, that Will's mentioning, if you look for that community that you're mentioning, Ifraax, you know, it's proactive, isn't it? And it goes back to what you were just saying, Julian, that the resources are already there. We are really sadly running out of time. We are going to definitely have to do a part 2. I would love to just ask each of the panelists for some proactive thoughts and ways forward that people can take away from tonight. Julian, let's start with you.
So everyone has got gifts or skills. Everyone has got something to bring. And it might be just a nice personality. It might be you're really good at table tennis. It might be that you can sing, it doesn't matter. But those skills are not much use when you keep them to yourself. And so when you're thinking about building community, it's not really about, oh, we've got to have this much investment in this and that. It is about really bringing together what's already there. There's a really big problem with when you say, oh, well, yeah, you know, programs like Sure Start and all of that kind of stuff, when the money disappears, as inevitably it does with political funding, the whole lot disappears and you leave behind a wasteland. Whereas if you think about your gifts and skills and what that means when they're connected with your community, that's the place to start.
Thank you. Absolutely brilliant. Will?
I'm slightly I think I would pivot back to what I've already said. I think go and get involved in your own community. You know, start with your own community, because that's where we can make the biggest difference, you know, and make an impact. And you know, I also think partly that sometimes involves pushing ourselves out of our comfort zones, you know, whether that's, you know, to Ifraax's point about going and engaging with people with different viewpoints and perspectives, you know, when, especially in the world of social media, we've been pushed into one corner, that can push us out of our comfort zones. If we're people who like to sit and engage with our computers and suddenly find ourselves sat at a coffee morning, that pushes ourselves out of our comfort zones, you know. But going and talking to people, you know, that is the single most important thing and the place to start.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Ifraax?
I want to first of all thank you, Anya, for this space, and I want to just say how privileged and honor it was to listen to everything that we've heard so far, because this topic is a topic that's an moment in society, if that makes sense, rather than, like you said, pragmatic, actionable moments. Because if somebody, we don't just openly, outly say, I'm lonely or I'm feeling lonely, you know, it's one of those things that's, I don't know, it's not just a British culture thing, but it's a society thing where people don't talk about the most vulnerable aspects of our lives. And Anya, you know that I was away from the council for almost a year because I was facing long-term illness that I was recovering from, still recovering from, because I can't wave a magic wand and be healed and perfect. But that doesn't mean that I am not able to do things. It just means that I'm not as the way I used to be before, if that makes sense. So the compassion and the understanding of how we not isolate people and make sure that people are included in everything that we're doing. It's not just the community is over there and the community should do something. It's what Julian said about, you have a skill, you have a talent, you have an opportunity. You be that voice, you be that person that takes that first step that says, I'm opening the door, I'm opening the space, you are welcome to join. And that curiosity, that understanding of whatever labels you identify as, it's not that what I'm interested in. I'm interested in you as a human, as an individual. That's what we need to do more of. And
Absolutely.
I hope, as utopic and nice as that sounds, we start small and we work our way up. That's the best thing that we can do.
Effect. It's the ripple effect, isn't it? I am so sorry we've run out of time. We are definitely going to have to do a part 2. For any of you watching and wanting to know more about the work of compassion in politics, we would love you to come and look at the website and find out about all the things that we're involved with. Thank you so much to Will, Julian and Ifraax for all the work you're doing in this space. Thank you for some of the solutions that you've given and a lot of the thoughts that you've given for all of us. It makes a great deal. It means a great deal. So thank you. And apologies again for late start to the meeting, but I really am very grateful that we've had this evening. So thank you all for this evening and have a wonderful evening.